The weight of SLENC. The morning air felt heavy with approaching rain as Victoria Hayes pushed through the revolving doors of Mercy General Hospital. She clutched her appointment card tightly, the corners already softened from repeated handling over the past week. 5 years of carefully constructed routine, and now this. Another checkup. Another reminder of the secret that had shaped every decision since. The reception area buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses moved with purposeful efficiency while patients waited in molded plastic chairs that had seen better decades. Victoria checked in with barely a whisper, her voice lost somewhere between habit and anxiety. The receptionist smiled kindly and directed her toward the elevator bank on the east wing. She had chosen this hospital specifically because it was across town. Far from her neighborhood. Far from the possibility of running into anyone who might ask questions or recognize faces. For 5 years, distance had been her closest ally. Distance and silence. The elevator chimed softly as the doors slid open. Victoria stepped inside, pressing the button for the 4th floor. As the car ascended, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. Dark circles shadowed her eyes despite the concealer she had carefully applied that morning. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, nothing that would draw attention. She had become an expert at being unremarkable. The doors opened to reveal a corridor painted in soothing blues and grays. Watercolor prints of pastoral scenes dotted the walls at regular intervals. Someone had decided that art might make illness easier to bear. Victoria followed the signs toward the medical offices, her sneakers silent against the polished linoleum. Halfway down the corridor, she noticed the vending machines tucked into a small alcove. Her throat felt suddenly dry. She veered toward them, fishing coins from her jacket pocket. The machine hummed as it dispensed a paper cup and filled it with lukewarm water. She wrapped both hands around it, feeling the slight give of the cup beneath her fingers. That was when she heard the laugh. Deep, confident, unmistakable even after all these years. Her entire body went rigid. Through the glass doors at the corridor's end, she saw him. Nathan Sterling stood in conversation with a doctor, his posture relaxed and commanding in equal measure. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The watch on his wrist caught the overhead lights, sending small flashes of gold across the walls. Everything about him spoke of success, of a man who had claimed his place in the world and settled into it comfortably. Victoria's breath caught somewhere between her lungs and throat. She turned slightly, angling her body toward the vending machines as if suddenly fascinated by the selection of snacks behind the glass. Her heart hammered against her ribs with painful force. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she last saw him. 5 years since she made the decision that still woke her up at night, wondering if she had chosen correctly. 5 years of telling herself that silence was protection, that absence was a gift, that some truths were too complicated to speak aloud. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. She pulled it out with shaking hands. A calendar reminder glowed on the screen. Medical appointment, 12 weeks checkup. She almost laughed at the irony. She did not need digital reminders for something carved so deeply into her daily consciousness. Nathan's voice carried down the corridor. He was thanking the doctor for something, his tone warm and genuine. Victoria had forgotten how he sounded when he smiled. Or maybe she had spent 5 years trying to forget, only to have it all come rushing back in a single moment. She risked another glance through her peripheral vision. He looked older, but in the way that added character rather than diminished it. His dark hair showed hints of silver at the temples. Lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes. But there was something else too. A weight in his posture that had not existed before. Success had given him confidence, but perhaps it had also taught him the price of ambition. Victoria remembered when that ambition had been everything. When he spent nights hunched over business plans and spreadsheets, surviving on instant coffee and impossible dreams. She had believed in those dreams too. She had listened to him talk about building something meaningful, something that would outlast both of them. His passion had been intoxicating. But passion does not pay for prenatal vitamins. Dreams do not cover the cost of childcare. And ambition, no matter how pure, does not guarantee that someone will choose you when the choice becomes difficult. A nurse appeared beside her, speaking in a gentle voice that suggested this was not the first time she had tried to get Victoria's attention. "Miss Hayes? We're ready for you now." Victoria nodded mutely. She forced her feet to move, to carry her toward the examination room that represented yet another checkpoint in a journey she had been traveling alone. Each step felt like moving through water. Behind her, Nathan's conversation with the doctor concluded. She heard footsteps, heard him say something about catching up later. And then, in the particular way that fate sometimes operates with theatrical precision, he turned. Their eyes met across the width of the corridor. Recognition flashed across his face, quick as lightning and just as striking. His smile faltered mid-expression. Confusion flickered through his features, followed by something deeper. A question he had stopped asking years ago suddenly demanding to be voiced. Victoria looked away first. She always had. She followed the nurse through the doorway, feeling Nathan's gaze on her back like a physical weight. The door closed with a soft click that sounded far too final. Inside the examination room, Victoria sat on the paper-covered table and tried to steady her breathing. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach, a gesture that had become second nature. The nurse asked routine questions about pain levels and symptoms, but Victoria's answers came automatically, her mind still trapped in that moment of recognition in the hallway. She had rehearsed this scenario countless times over the years. What she would say if they ever crossed paths. How she would explain the unexplainable. But none of those careful mental scripts had prepared her for the reality of seeing him again, of watching understanding begin to dawn in his eyes. Outside, Nathan stood motionless in the corridor, his meeting forgotten. His mind was working through calculations, timelines, memories that suddenly demanded re-examination. Something about the way she had looked at him. Something about the protective gesture of her hands. Something about the 5 years of silence that had never quite made sense. He had tried to move on after she left. He had thrown himself into his work, built his company from concept to empire, achieved every goal he had outlined in those late-night planning sessions. But success had a way of highlighting what was missing. And something had been missing since the morning he woke to find her gone without explanation. Now, standing in this sterile hospital corridor, Nathan felt the edges of a truth he had not known he was searching for. It pressed against his consciousness like a shape behind frosted glass. Almost visible. Almost clear. Almost within reach. Inside the examination room, Victoria closed her eyes and made a silent promise to the life she had protected for 5 years. Whatever happened next, whatever truth emerged from this chance encounter, she would not let anyone question whether her choice had been made with love. But fate was only beginning to tighten the threads that bound them. And some truths, once disturbed, cannot be buried again. Part 2, Threads of Fate begin to weave. The examination concluded without incident, though Victoria barely registered the doctor's words. Her mind remained fixed on the hallway, on Nathan's face, on the dangerous possibility that their carefully separated worlds had just collided. She accepted the printed paperwork with numb fingers, tucked it into her purse alongside older documents that told the same story in different dates. The nurse walked her back toward the main corridor, still offering gentle instructions about follow-up appointments and medication schedules. Victoria nodded at appropriate intervals, her attention divided between appearing normal and planning her escape route. The elevator was only 30 feet away. 30 feet and she could disappear back into the anonymity of the city. She thanked the nurse and turned toward Salvation. Her purse shifted on her shoulder as she walked, its weight familiar and comforting. Inside it carried the evidence of 5 years' worth of choices. Appointment cards. Insurance documents. Photographs taken in parks and playgrounds. A child's drawing folded carefully between protective sheets of plastic. and one older photograph that she had never quite managed to throw away. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Victoria stepped inside, finally allowing herself to exhale. The doors began to slide closed, offering the barrier she desperately needed. But in that final second before they sealed completely, something slipped from her purse. A piece of paper, folded and refolded until its creases had become permanent scars in the surface. It caught the air current from the closing doors and fluttered outward, landing face up on the polished hospital floor. Victoria never noticed. The elevator descended, carrying her away from the fourth floor, away from examination rooms and dangerous encounters, back toward the ground level where she could reclaim her routine and pretend the morning had been nothing more than ordinary. Behind her, Nathan emerged from the men's room where he had retreated to collect his thoughts. The meeting with the doctor had been routine, just a preliminary discussion about funding for a new research wing. But routine had shattered the moment he saw her face. The woman who had occupied his thoughts for 5 years despite his best efforts to forget. The woman who had left without explanation, without argument, without giving him the chance to understand what he had done wrong. He walked slowly down the corridor, his mind churning through memories and questions. Had she been sick? Was that why she was here? The protective way she held herself suggested something more than a casual checkup. But what? His foot nearly stepped on the paper before he noticed it. Years of careful attention to detail, the same skill that had built his fortune, made him pause. Someone had dropped something. The decent thing would be to return it or hand it to the reception desk. He bent down and picked it up. The paper felt soft, worn from handling. Without thinking, he unfolded it. The image stared back at him in grainy black and white. Ultrasound photographs had a distinctive quality that made them instantly recognizable even to someone with no medical background. Nathan had seen them before, framed in the offices of colleagues who kept such things on their desks beside family portraits and vacation snapshots. But this one was not behind glass or mounted in an expensive frame. This one was creased and faded, carried and refolded so many times that the edges had begun to separate. Someone had treasured this image. Someone had held it often enough to wear it down. Nathan's eyes found the date printed in the corner. His breath stopped. The numbers did not lie. They could not be misread or misinterpreted. The date was from 5 years ago. More specifically, from approximately 5 years and 7 months ago. His mind, trained to recognize patterns and calculate probabilities, began making connections he had not asked it to make. The timeline fit too perfectly. The way she had left without explanation. The protective gesture of her hands. The fact that she was here, in a hospital, at what appeared to be a routine checkup. Nathan stood motionless in the corridor, holding a stranger's ultrasound photograph and feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. Coincidence, his rational mind insisted. Hospitals processed hundreds of patients daily. People dropped things constantly. The statistical probability of this image being connected to the woman he had just seen was minimal at best. But Nathan had built an empire on trusting instincts that defied statistics. And every instinct he possessed was screaming that this was not coincidence. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. His afternoon schedule, packed with meetings and conference calls, suddenly felt impossibly distant and irrelevant. He walked to the reception desk where a tired-looking administrator was processing a stack of insurance forms. "Excuse me," Nathan said, employing the particular tone of voice that made people pay attention without quite understanding why. "A woman just left here. Brown hair, wore a blue sweater. Do you know if she comes here regularly?" The administrator looked up, clearly torn between patient privacy protocols and the authority radiating from the well-dressed man before her. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss patient information." "Of course," Nathan said smoothly. "I understand completely. I think she may have dropped something, and I wanted to return it. Perhaps you could give me a general idea of when she might be back?" The administrator hesitated, then glanced at her computer screen. "We have several patients who match that description. Without a name, I really can't help you." Nathan thanked her and stepped away, his mind already shifting to alternative approaches. He had not built a successful business by accepting the first rejection. Information existed somewhere. It simply required the right questions asked of the right people. Over the following days, Nathan found his thoughts returning obsessively to that folded ultrasound image. He kept it in his desk drawer, taking it out during quiet moments to study the date, the details, the small notation written in medical shorthand at the bottom. He told himself he was being irrational. That grief could make people see patterns where none existed. That 5 years of wondering about her disappearance had created an emotional need for answers that was now attaching itself to random evidence. But rational arguments held less weight with each passing hour. His assistant noticed the distraction during their morning briefing. "Mr. Sterling? The charity committee is still waiting for your decision about the school partnership." Nathan blinked, pulling his attention back to the present. "School partnership?" "The literacy program," his assistant prompted gently. "The one you asked me to research last month. They serve underprivileged neighborhoods and provide after-school support. You said you wanted to make education initiatives a priority this quarter." Something clicked in Nathan's memory. Not about the program itself, but about the name of the school. He had seen it mentioned in a news article weeks ago, praised for serving families in the Eastern District. The same district where he had noticed Victoria's car parked during that brief glimpse in the hospital parking lot before she drove away. "Tell them yes," Nathan heard himself say. "And arrange for me to visit. I want to see the program in person before we finalize the donation." His assistant looked mildly surprised. Nathan Sterling was generous with funding but rarely made personal appearances at the organizations he supported. But she simply nodded and made a note on her tablet. Nathan told himself it was due diligence. Responsible philanthropy. Any businessman would want to verify that their investment was being used effectively. The fact that this particular school happened to serve the neighborhood where Victoria might live was purely incidental. He almost believed it. The school visit was scheduled for the following week. In the interim, Nathan threw himself into work with renewed focus, as if activity might quiet the questions multiplying in his mind. But late at night, alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, he found himself holding that folded ultrasound image and wondering about the child it represented. Somewhere in this city, a child existed who would now be approximately 5 years old. A child whose mother had vanished from Nathan's life at precisely the time when such a child would have been conceived. A child whose existence had been hidden so thoroughly that Nathan had never once suspected the truth. If it was the truth. If his instincts were correct. If fate had handed him evidence of something he had missed completely. Across town, Victoria tucked Oliver into bed with his favorite stuffed elephant and a promise of pancakes for breakfast. Her son had inherited her dark hair, but his eyes were a different story. They held a particular intensity that made her chest ache every time she looked at him. "Mama?" Oliver asked sleepily. "Teacher said someone important is coming to school next week. Someone who helps kids." Victoria smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "That's nice, sweetheart. I'm sure they'll be very impressed with your class." "Will you be there?" he asked. "I'll try," she promised, knowing she would move heaven and earth to avoid being anywhere near that school if someone important was visiting. Important people asked questions. Important people noticed things. Important people could unravel 5 years of careful protection with a single observation. Oliver's eyes drifted closed, and Victoria sat beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. This was the life she had built. Small, quiet, safe. No complications. No conflicts. No moments when the truth might slip out and destroy the fragile peace they had created. But as she sat there in the darkness, Victoria felt the weight of premonition settling over her shoulders. That encounter in the hospital corridor had disturbed something. She could feel it the way animals sense approaching storms. The careful distance she had maintained was beginning to collapse. And somewhere across the city, Nathan Sterling was folding an ultrasound photograph back into his pocket and circling a date on his calendar with quiet determination. Fate had placed the first thread in his hands. Now it was simply a matter of following it to wherever it led. Even if the destination rewrote everything he thought he understood about the past 5 years. Even if the truth waiting at the end changed everything about the future he had been building. Some questions, once asked, demanded answers. And Nathan had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. When truth meets time. The morning of the school visit arrived with unseasonable warmth. Sunshine poured through the windows of Riverside Elementary, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air above rows of small desks. Children buzzed with excitement, their usual routine disrupted by the promise of something special. Teachers moved through the halls with clipboards and encouraging smiles, reminding everyone to be on their best behavior. Victoria had considered keeping Oliver home that day. A convenient illness, a sudden appointment, any excuse that would remove them from the building before the mysterious important visitor arrived. But Oliver had talked about nothing else for 3 days. His excitement was so pure, so uncomplicated, that she could not bring herself to steal it from him. Instead, she made a different calculation. Important donors rarely stayed long at these events. They made appearances, shook hands, posed for photographs, and departed. If she arrived late for pickup, lingered in the parking lot, kept herself invisible among the other parents, she could avoid direct contact entirely. It was a reasonable plan. Victoria had become an expert at reasonable plans that kept her world safely separate from Nathan's. What she had not accounted for was the flat tire. The school called at 2:15, just as Victoria was preparing to leave work early. Oliver had been involved in a minor accident on the playground. Nothing serious, the nurse assured her quickly, just a scraped knee that needed cleaning and a bandage. But he was asking for his mother, and could she come? Victoria's carefully constructed timeline shattered. She grabbed her keys and rushed to her car, her heart pounding with the particular panic that only parents understand. The drive across town felt endless. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every slow driver became an obstacle between her and her child. She pulled into the school parking lot at 3 o'clock, abandoning her car in the first available space. The building entrance was decorated with balloons and a banner thanking their generous sponsor. Parents clustered near the doorway, some holding programs from an event that had clearly just concluded. Victoria pushed through the crowd toward the nurse's office, barely registering her surroundings. The hallways smelled like floor polish and cafeteria food. Children's artwork covered every available wall space. Under different circumstances, she might have paused to admire the bright colors and ambitious attempts at perspective. But not today. Today her only thought was reaching Oliver. The nurse's office door stood open. Victoria stepped inside and saw her son sitting on the examination table, one leg stretched out to display a bandaged knee. His eyes were red from crying, but he brightened immediately when he saw her. "Mama." Victoria crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled him into a hug that was probably too tight. "Are you?" "I think so," Oliver said. "He was talking to Ms. Rodriguez about the library when we left." Victoria's mind raced through options. She could grab Oliver and leave immediately. Make an excuse about another appointment. But that would seem suspicious, would invite questions. She could wait here until she was certain Nathan had departed. But the nurse clearly had other students to attend to, and Victoria could not hide in the office indefinitely. She was still calculating probabilities when footsteps approached in the hallway. Multiple sets. Adult conversation carrying the particular tone of official tours winding down. The expansion would add 3 additional classrooms, a woman's voice was saying. "We're hoping to break ground next spring if funding comes through." "Consider it done," came the reply. That voice, deeper, confident, achingly familiar. My team will have the paperwork to you by the end of the week. Victoria turned toward the door, some instinct making her move even though logic said she should stay hidden. Oliver slipped off the examination table and grabbed her hand, eager to show off his bandage to the nice man who had helped him. They stepped into the hallway at precisely the moment Nathan emerged from a classroom doorway with the school principal and 2 teachers. For a second, maybe less, the world hung suspended. 2 people who had spent 5 years in separate orbits suddenly standing 15 feet apart with no barriers between them. Nathan saw her first. Recognition flashed across his face, followed immediately by something more complex. His gaze dropped to the small boy holding her hand, and Victoria watched the calculation happen in real time. The same calculation she had made 1,000 times when looking at her son's face in the mirror. Oliver had his mother's dark hair and the shape of her smile. But his eyes were different. Gray-blue with flecks of darker color. And the way he tilted his head when curious, the way his brow furrowed when concentrating, the particular set of his shoulders even at 5 years old. Nathan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, comprehension, disbelief, and finally something that looked like grief and wonder colliding. The principal, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air, smiled at Victoria. Mrs. Hayes, perfect timing. I wanted to introduce you to Nathan Sterling, the benefactor who is making our expansion possible. Mr. Sterling, this is Victoria Hayes, one of our parent volunteers. Victoria forced words through her constricted throat. We've met. Nathan had not moved. He stood frozen in the hallway, his attention locked on Oliver with an intensity that made Victoria want to grab her son and run. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded carefully controlled. Hello, Victoria. It's been a long time. Yes, she managed. It has. Oliver tugged at her hand, innocent and oblivious. Mama, this is Mr. Sterling. He helped me when I fell down. Nathan crouched slowly, bringing himself to Oliver's eye level. The movement seemed to cost him effort, as if his body was fighting every instinct telling him to demand answers immediately. How's your knee feeling? Better, Oliver reported proudly. The nurse said I was very brave and only cried a little bit. That is very brave, Nathan agreed. His voice remained steady, but Victoria could see his hands trembling slightly. What's your name? Oliver, her son announced. Oliver Hayes. I'm 5 years old and my birthday is September 15th. Victoria watched the remaining color drain from Nathan's face. September 15th. 5 years ago. The math was not complicated. Even the principal seemed to sense something unusual in the sudden silence that fell over the group. Nathan straightened slowly, his eyes moving from Oliver to Victoria with a look that held 1,000 unspoken questions. September 15th, he repeated quietly. 5 years ago. It was not a question. It was an accusation and a revelation and a beginning all at once. Victoria felt the walls she had built over 5 years crumbling. Every careful choice, every sacrifice, every lonely night wondering if she had done the right thing. All of it was coming undone in an elementary school hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and children's laughter echoing from distant classrooms. We need to talk, Nathan said. Not a request. Not a demand. Something in between that acknowledged they had moved beyond the point where either of them had a choice anymore. Victoria nodded, her throat too tight for words. She looked down at Oliver, at his innocent face still glowing with the excitement of his dinosaur bandage, and felt her heart break in a completely new way. He deserved better than a secret. He deserved better than half-truths and careful omissions. He deserved a father who looked at him with the same wonder currently transforming Nathan's expression despite the anger and confusion beneath it. 5 years, Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 years, Victoria. You kept him from me for 5 years. She wanted to explain. Wanted to justify her choices with all the reasonable arguments she had rehearsed countless times. The timing was wrong. He was building an empire. She did not want to be an obligation. She was protecting both of them from a decision made under pressure. But standing here now, watching pain and wonder war across Nathan's face, all those justifications felt hollow. Because the truth was simpler and more complicated than any excuse could capture. She had been afraid. Afraid of being left. Afraid of being chosen for the wrong reasons. Afraid that love was not enough when weighted against ambition and timing and the messy reality of unplanned parenthood. So she had chosen silence. And in doing so, she had stolen 5 years from a man who was now looking at her like she had ripped out his heart and only just returned it, damaged but still beating. "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything. "Nathan, I'm so sorry." He shook his head slowly, still processing, still trying to reconcile the woman he remembered with the one standing before him. "Why didn't you tell me? Even after he was born. Why didn't you give me the chance?" Before Victoria could answer, Oliver's voice called from down the hallway. He had escaped from the principal, too excited about a book he wanted to show his mother to wait for story time to end. He came running around the corner, the book clutched in both hands, his dinosaur bandage visible beneath his rolled-up pants leg. He skidded to a stop between them, looking up with a smile that was pure joy and pure innocence. And in that moment, seeing Nathan and Oliver standing side by side, the resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes. The same tilt of the head. The same expression of curiosity mixed with determination. Nathan knelt again, this time with tears he did not bother hiding. He reached out slowly, as if afraid Oliver might disappear if he moved too quickly. "May I see your book?" Oliver handed it over proudly, launching into an explanation about dinosaurs and how the T-Rex was actually covered in feathers and wasn't that amazing. Victoria watched Nathan listen to his son, watched him drinking in every detail, every word, every gesture. And she understood with terrible clarity that some choices could never be unmade. Some consequences could never be avoided. Some truths, once revealed, changed everything. The three of them stood in that elementary school hallway while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and somewhere nearby a janitor pushed a mop bucket and the ordinary world continued turning. But for them, nothing would ever be ordinary again. Because time had finally revealed what Victoria had kept hidden. And now they would have to find a way forward through the wreckage of 5 years' worth of silence. Nathan looked up at her over Oliver's head, his expression impossible to read. Anger was there, certainly. But also something else. Something that looked like hope struggling to survive despite every reason to give up on it. "We have a lot to talk about," he said quietly. Victoria nodded, tears finally spilling down her own cheeks. "Yes. We do." Oliver, oblivious to the adult emotions swirling above him, tugged at Nathan's sleeve. "Do you want to see my favorite picture? It's the one with the Brachiosaurus and it's really, really big." Nathan smiled through his tears, and Victoria saw in that smile the man she had fallen in love with years ago. The one who believed in impossible dreams and never gave up when things got difficult. The one she had been too afraid to trust with the most important truth of her life. "I would love to see it," Nathan said to Oliver. Then, meeting Victoria's eyes, he added more quietly, "I want to see everything." And Victoria understood that he meant more than just pictures in a book. He meant birthday parties he had missed. First steps he had not witnessed. 5 years of a life that should have been shared but was lived in parallel instead. All of it waiting to be discovered, explained, grieved, and somehow forgiven. The future stretched ahead of them uncertain and complicated. But for the first time in 5 years, it stretched ahead of them together. 3 people connected by biology and circumstance and choices both right and wrong, learning how to become something they had never been before. A family.